When I was 12 years old, my parents went away for a week to visit family in a different country. Originally, they had planned for me to join them, but I begged and begged for them to let me stay home. I hated visiting family overseas. My older brother, who was 17, was staying home, and they eventually agreed to let me stay with him. The first few nights were fine. It was summer break, so I didn't have school, and there was plenty of food in the house. My brother was quite lenient, letting me eat whatever I wanted and stay up late. Everything seemed normal. Then, one night, on the fourth night of my parents being away, my brother decided to order a pizza. We had some extra cash, and we hadn't spent any of it, so we figured a pizza was in order. He placed the order, and we sat in the living room, waiting for it to arrive. Up to this point, my brother had avoided going out with his friends because he was concerned about leaving me home alone. However, that night, he invited a couple of his friends over to join us, Drew and Chance. The four of us were hanging out together, having a good time, when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Thinking it was the pizza delivery person, my brother got up to answer it. He ran down the stairs with some cash in hand, about to unlock the door, when Drew quickly shouted for him to wait. From the living room window, Drew had seen something outside in the driveway and wanted to check it out. As I went over to see what was going on, I noticed that there was no car parked in the driveway, and there were no cars along the curb. Just my brother's car and a neighbor's car in the distance. My brother came halfway up the stairs to ask what was wrong, and Drew told him about the strange car situation. My brother then realized that he hadn't invited anyone else over to the house, and no one else knew we were home alone for the week, except for his two best friends. They were definitely not the type to spread word of a party or anything like that. I hadn't told anyone either. We all stood upstairs together, periodically looking through the window. The person who had knocked was now out of our line of sight, and we couldn't see them from our vantage point. The lights in the front of the house were off, and the blinds were closed, so this person couldn't see us. However, we could see them. To our surprise, there were two of them, both men, tall and dressed entirely in black. The lower halves of their faces were covered by their jacket collars. Right away, something felt off. My brother ordered me to wait in the living room. Before that moment, he had never used that tone with me. I would normally have felt inclined to disobey him, but I could tell by the shakiness in his voice that he wasn't joking around. I promptly stepped away from the window and walked into the living room. My brother and his friends began whispering to each other, debating on what to do. They were unsure about the intentions of the men in the driveway. The knocking continued, louder and harder each time, as if the men were growing impatient. When we heard footsteps coming up the sundeck, we panicked and shut off all the TVs and lights in the room. I remember sitting between my brother and Drew while Chance went to the kitchen to grab the phone. We decided that if it was a prank, we would call the police to be safe. At this point, we all knew it wasn't a prank. This lasted for a good 30 minutes, continuous knocks and questions about a lost dog. We all knew that the "have you seen my dog" thing was a major red flag, so we never responded. We made it seem like no one was home, which eventually deterred the men. A short while later, the knocks and questions came to an end. My brother went over to the front window to check, confirming that the men were gone. Still, we were reluctant to let our guard down. It was 10 minutes later when there was another knock. This time it was the actual pizza delivery person. My brother and Chance went down to answer the door, paid for the pizza, and came back up with our order. Slowly we grew less anxious, ate our pizza, and even laughed about how scared we had been. We convinced ourselves that we had overreacted. After a few days, our parents returned home. But little did we know that not far from our house, a similar incident had ended tragically. Let me start with a bit of background. Like most students, I was always short on cash and looking for ways to make extra money. One of my side gigs was house and pet sitting. I've always had a soft spot for animals, so when a couple reached out to me to house sit for them during the last few days of their overseas trip, I eagerly accepted. The previous sitter had bailed on them, and their 6-month-old golden retriever puppy would be all alone. What sweetened the deal was their promise to pay me the full 2-week fee, even though I'd be there for less than a week. Little did I know just how nightmarish it would turn out. I gathered the necessary details and picked up the keys from the agent. It was already past 5 p.m., and dusk was settling in, given that it was early spring. The house was situated in a decent neighborhood, but it bordered an area known for its higher crime rate. House break-ins, robberies, you name it. Strangely, this didn't bother me much. I was young and perhaps a bit too naive, believing that nothing bad could happen to me. The first 4 nights went off without a hitch. I spent my time watching movies, enjoying the jacuzzi, and generally having a great time. The homeowners were scheduled to return on the 5th day, quite late in the evening. I decided to check on their adorable puppy. Around 10 p.m., my phone rang. It was them, informing me that their flight had been delayed. They planned to stay at a hotel and make the 3.5-hour drive back the following morning. They asked if I could stay over one more night, which I agreed to. I was already there, and my overnight bag was still in my car. I decided to call my dad and inform him of the change in plans. He specifically asked for the address, although I usually didn't share such details because I considered myself old enough to take care of myself. Little did I know that this decision would likely save my life. Around 1 a.m., I finally went to bed, and it felt like I had barely closed my eyes when I was jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass. I could hear strange noises, footsteps racing down the hallway, and an unsettling commotion. Panic set in. My first instinct was to grab my phone and redial my dad. My trusty old Motorola phone allowed me to redial with a single button press. Hoping to wake him up with the call, I then strategically placed the phone between the headboard and the mattress so that if he picked up, he could hear what was unfolding. Barely a moment later, the bedroom door burst open, and a menacing figure loomed in the doorway. He held a knife in his hand, and fear surged through me. Without a second thought, I raised my legs, preparing for the worst. As he closed in, I launched a powerful kick with both legs, propelled by my 6'3", 220-pound frame. You see, I was in good shape from regular gym visits, benching 250 pounds and squatting 350 pounds. My kick made solid contact, sending the intruder flying and causing him to drop the knife. But my respite was short-lived. Before he could regain his footing, I pounced on him, driving my right knee forcefully into his face, slamming his head into the wall. I knew my life was on the line, and I exerted every ounce of strength I had. He crumpled to the floor like a sack of potatoes, but the nightmare was far from over. As I began to contemplate my next move, paralyzed by fear and adrenaline, I heard a chilling sound, the unmistakable click of a pistol. I was frozen in terror. It felt like all the blood had drained from my body, leaving me numb. The only thought racing through my mind was that I'd rather die than be left disabled or dependent on others to take care of me if he decided to pull the trigger. The intruder stood there with the pistol against my head, and although it was probably only about 10 seconds, it felt like an eternity. I didn't dare move. He eventually ordered me in broken English to get on the floor. I didn't understand the words, but I recognized the language. We used to vacation in Mozambique, where that language was spoken. One of the intruders struggled to get his accomplice, the guy I had kicked down earlier, back on his feet while the others began ransacking the house, cramming valuables into a big bag. It was around this time that I heard the screeching of tires and a car approaching at what sounded like breakneck speed. The car skidded to a halt right in front of the gate, and I heard someone scream. It was my dad. The 3 intruders panicked and desperately tried to escape. I grabbed a flashlight from my dad and began scanning the yard. As I reached the corner, I saw her lying on the ground. It was the dog. I rushed to her side, but it was too late. Later autopsies revealed she had been poisoned, and the police found pieces of meat laced with poison near the fence. Poisoning is a grimly common practice in my country when criminals target a house for a break-in or robbery, but it didn't make the loss any less devastating. I was a mix of fury and sorrow, and the police didn't seem to be much help. The rest of that day was a blur as I gradually came down from the shock and adrenaline. But that's not where the story ends. 7 or 8 months later, a call from the detective brought a glimmer of hope. They had caught the intruders, and I was asked to attend a lineup to identify them. I explained that I hadn't seen their faces. It had been too dark, and I had been hiding under the blanket during the ordeal. The detective assured me they had used fingerprints to catch them and would show me the culprits. On that night, if they hadn't been captured, I wouldn't have escaped so lightly. But the story continues. 3 days later, another call from the detective urged me to be cautious. One of the intruders had managed to escape from custody, and they hadn't recaptured him yet. I wasn't overly worried, as the break-in hadn't occurred at my own house and I had changed cars, making it less likely for him to track me down. Besides, I had obtained a firearm license and carried my pistol with me 24/7. However, the tale takes yet another twist. 2 years later, I purchased my first house. I moved in, feeling like I had finally made it. I brought tons of stuff into the place, making it feel like a palace. I bought bar stools, a futon for sleeping until I got a proper bed, and some used coffee tables for my TV. My loyal dog was with me throughout. As I unpacked in the living room, I noticed a car pulling into my driveway, blocking me in. I stepped outside to see a man offering to sell me a home security system. He was dressed in khaki pants and a polo shirt with a logo. I made a critical mistake by sharing too much information during our conversation. When he asked if I lived alone, I replied, "No, I live here with my wife and 3 large dogs," even though I had exaggerated about the dogs. I even mentioned my Marine background when he inquired about it. Although he seemed taken aback, he remained undeterred. Eventually, I reluctantly agreed to get the security system, but explained that I had nowhere to put most of it right away. I left the system components in boxes and bags scattered around the house, and went on to assemble the futon, complete with my fluffiest blankets. I ensured all doors and windows were locked before settling down in the living room to sleep. Looking back, I questioned my choice of not placing the futon in a bedroom with blinds and further from the entry points, perhaps in my eagerness to be near an exit. My back door consisted of double glass panes without curtains, although there were blinds on the windows within the door. Suddenly, I heard a tapping sound, and fear gripped me. I was paralyzed, torn between hiding or calling the cops. However, I realized that if someone was outside, they'd spot my phone's light and know exactly where I was. My loyal dogs stationed themselves at the back door, growling menacingly. Gathering every ounce of courage, I moved off the couch and embarked on an investigation, still trembling with fear. I cautiously entered the kitchen, grabbed a kitchen knife, one of the few utensils I had at the time, and stealthily approached the kitchen window. I crouched among the cabinets, allowing me to see what was happening on the edge of my porch. There, I spotted a man on the porch's edge peering in, his gaze fixed on my back door and my dog. Panic surged within me. Without a second thought, I sprang into action, leaping over the bar counter and switching on the lights as I moved toward the back door. My dog was still growling, and I desperately hoped he'd at least scare the intruder away, if not thwart him completely. Yet, the man managed to escape over the low part of the fence just as my dog was getting off the porch. The intruder had evaded capture once again, and I spent the entire night wide awake, trembling with fear, with my faithful dog beside me. But the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned for what happens next. Hello, everyone. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or entertaining, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Your support motivates us to create more content you'll love. Thanks a million. And if you've just subscribed, please drop a comment saying I subscribed. We'd love to welcome you to our community.